Well folks, the results of this year's election are in. And, in a stunning turn of events, for the first time ever in the history of our country, the winner is unanimous. Yes, that's right, at least 90% of the country voted, and every single one was for the same candidate, which, as you'd all guessed, is none other than Jerry the Rock. Congratulations, Jerry. I know for a fact you'll be able to lead this country well.
Yes! Woo! Oh, hello human beings, PowerGamer here. Sorry, just celebrating the victory of my beloved pet Rock. I knew you had it in you, Jerry, and I'm glad I could support you all the way. But enough politics, we have more important things to discuss. Like, what was up with that one time Nintendo decided to release 2 Zelda games instead of just 1?
The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages, and Seasons 2, I guess. Such an odd release in that it was 2 companion titles that were actually completely different from each other, but it's not like Zelda was a complete stranger to this concept. There was the CDI games. Feel like everyone is obligated to mention those at some point. Well, these games were different in that they actually are Zelda games, and instead of Nintendo, they were developed by Flagship, a subsidiary of Capcom, which is interesting. It came about when head screenwriter Yoshiki Okamoto approached Shigeru Miyamoto with the idea of remaking the original Legend of Zelda for the Game Boy Color, both as a way for young children to play it, while also seeing if a more ambitious sequel could be made in the future. But since the original was deemed too hard for young players, they implemented so many changes that it basically became a completely different game, which also allowed them to create an original storyline. Okamoto then proposed a trilogy of games titled the Triforce series, which would share similar elements and have an ongoing story across all of them, but have a different focus point on each one. They were designed in a way so that the player could play the games in any order they want, and use a password system to link them together. The prototype versions were shown off in Nintendo Space World in 1999 under the names Mystical Seeds of Power, which became Oracle of Seasons, Mystical Seeds of Wisdom, which became Oracle of Ages, and Mystical Seeds of Courage, which ended up being cancelled, giving us only 2 games instead of 3. Both Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages were released for the Game Boy Color on February 27th, 2001 in Japan, May 14th in North America, and October 5th in Europe. And they were some of the few games to be exclusive to the Game Boy Color and unplayable on the original Game Boy, unlike Link's Awakening DX, interestingly. As you guessed, the games were very well received, especially at the time of their release, and they sold a combined total of 3.96 million copies, making them the 4th best-selling Game Boy Color game/games of all time. But despite their success, this was the only time the Zelda franchise would ever attempt a dual release like this, which is odd, but understandable since I assume they'd rather focus on 1 game rather than 2.
I've never played either of these games before, and I only have very limited knowledge of them. I know most people usually lump them together, but I'm gonna give them a chance to shine on their own and talk about each one individually. Plus, this way I don't have to play 2 Zelda games for 1 review. I'm gonna start with Oracle of Ages, and I'll save Seasons for next time. For now, let's see what happens when Nintendo attempts a dual release with the Zelda series, and it doesn't result in one of the most infamous pieces of media ever created.
Both games are interesting in that, like I said before, they're connected story-wise, but the order you play them doesn't actually matter. And it follows the same Link we saw in A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. I think. Again, weird timeline. In this game, Link receives a calling from the Triforce, which then transports him to the land of Labrinia. There he meets Zelda's nurse, Impa, who was sent there to find a woman named Nehru. After pushing this rock, they find Nehru, serenading some nearby animals with her singing. She and her friend Ralph explain that they heard Labrinia would soon face danger, but a hero from Hyrule would be sent to help them. And sure enough, we discover that Impa was possessed by the Sorceress of Shadows named Varen. Turns out Nehru is known as the Oracle of Ages and holds the power to travel through time. Varen possesses Nehru and travels 100 years into the past, where she begins to cause a ripple effect on the present, including preventing Labrina City's guardian, the Maku Tree, from existing. So Link travels back in time to when it was known as Labrina Village and discovers that Varen is manipulating Queen Ambi into building this large tower to reach the heavens and shroud the world in darkness. Link saves the Maku Tree and returns to the present where she falls in love with him. I mean, I've heard of a tree hugger before, but this is a bit too far. She tells him that he must collect the 8 essences of time hidden across Labrinia in order to beat Varen, so that's our mission. The story's about as simple as it was in the other 2D games. Villains doing something bad, so Link has to collect things to stop them. It does the job, but I do think Link's Awakening was a bit more interesting and had more memorable characters. The only main one in this game is Ralph, who pops up every once in a while claiming to help, even though he doesn't really, which is amusing, but everyone else is just kinda there. They also reuse quite a few characters from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. The game's graphics are on par with Link's Awakening DX, which is still pretty impressive for the Game Boy Color. And of course they have a plethora of puzzles that utilize color to show it off. The music is once again pretty limited, but it does the job fine enough.
The story isn't the only thing similar to Link's Awakening, the gameplay is basically a direct sequel as well.
You got the classic motif of looking for dungeons and using a variety of items, but structure-wise this is pretty much the same thing as the last handheld title since they obviously couldn't make a 3D Zelda game on a glorified calculator. Link controls exactly like he did in Link's Awakening, and we have most of the same items returning. The shovel, bombs, the Rock's Feather, the Power Bracelet, the Cane of Samaria, the Boomerang, which has sadly been nerfed from Link's Awakening, and for the first time ever, excluding Zelda 2, you don't actually get a bow in this game, which is kind kinda weird. But we have way more new items in this game than Link's Awakening, most of which come in the form of these seeds. Early on, you get the seed satchel, which stores them, and throughout the game you find these trees that grow different kinds of seeds, which all have different effects. Ember seeds light things on fire, mystery seeds give you hints from these owl statues and do random things to enemies, scent seeds lure enemies towards them, Pegasus seeds make you run faster, and gale seeds let you warp to the trees you've already encountered. You also get the seed shooter, which lets you use them as projectiles to hit enemies and switches. There's the switch hook, which is basically the hook shot, only it makes you switch places with whatever you hit, and the power glove, which is just an upgraded power bracelet. But by far the most important item is the Harp of Ages, which allows Link to travel through time, and it's pretty much a mix of the ocarina from the N64 games and the mirror from A Link to the Past. There's 2 different points of time you can switch to, like on the older games, and you get different tunes as you go. At first you only have the Echo tune, which activates these time pools, letting you shift back and forth, but you later unlock the Currents tune, which lets you warp to the future instantly, and return to the past in the spot you left off on, much like the mirror in the Dark World, and the Tune of Time, which lets you warp anywhere you want, making the other 2 obsolete. Sorry boys, in you go with the other basic songs.
Traveling through time is this game's core mechanic, and while that was used in Ocarina of Time, I think this game does it pretty differently, which leads to some really cool puzzles.
The different ways to use time travel is pretty cool. A lot of time you have to interact with both an ancestor and a descendant of the same family, and a lot of the layout changes in a natural way. It's cool to see what's there and what isn't when going into the past. You got these seeds that grow into vines in the future, allowing you to climb up walls. And remember that whole time loop thing with the Song of Storms and Ocarina of Time? Well, this game has a few instances of that, which is quite interesting to get. And sometimes an area in the future will start out one way and then change due to your actions in the past, allowing you to access new areas, which is really satisfying to figure out. Sadly though, we're still on a Game Boy, which means we still only have 2 buttons for items. So yeah, you have to deal with the constant item switching like in Link's Awakening. I wouldn't say it happens quite as often, but it's still pretty annoying. Thankfully, the game isn't bombarding you with text boxes all the time, like when you brush up against a rock without the power bracelet, the power-ups have been completely removed, and the compass doesn't remind you of the ringing feature every single time you get one. And now I think it's a good time to start talking about the dungeons. They are, not that good. Yeah, maybe I'm just bad at this game, but I honestly think Oracle of Ages has some of the most infuriating dungeons in all of Zelda. This game throws all sorts of obstacles at you that are really hard to get through, and like in A Link to the Past, you can't get rid of a lot of them. It brings back these annoying laser statues. So many of them have pits and lava that you can fall into, which doesn't just take away a heart, it sends you back to the beginning of the room. And a lot of the enemies are really frustrating, especially since you only have like 1 second of invincibility after you're getting hits. Your entire health can be drained almost instantly, and of course, this game is insanely stingy with its hearts. And the only potion costs 300 rupees, so get ready to die a lot. The fact that enemies respawn certainly doesn't help. Aside from being way harder, the dungeons work the same as in Link's Awakening, even down to having a mini-boss that makes a warp point.
The dungeons are easily the worst thing about this game, which is a shame because the overworld stuff is honestly better than most of the previous 2D Zelda games.
It's nowhere near as cryptic as the first 3 games, and not all of the dungeons require keys like in Link's Awakening. You still might get stuck every once in a while, but it's way more fun to do the stuff than previous 2D Zeldas. You even find some new animal companions, which is cool, but the way you use them is weird. There's 3 in total: Moosh the bear, who can hover for a bit, Ricky the kangaroo, who can punch things and jump up cliffs, and Dimitri the dodongo, who can swim and eat enemies. You run into these guys early on who help you and then leave. After meeting all of them, you can get one of 3 flutes, and whichever one you get determines which one you use for the rest of the game, and it is not explained to you at all, so good luck with that. You also randomly run into this witch named Maple, and if you bump into her, both of your things get scattered around and you want to grab them. The other big thing added in this game are the rings. You find these over the course of the game and can have them appraised at the shop. Once you do, you can then equip them to get some kind of perk like making you stronger but also take more damage, don't use that one, or making you immune to certain hazards. You can only equip one at a time, and some don't actually do anything, they're just there for collection's sake. The rings don't make a huge difference, but they are a neat thing to collect. The most common way of getting them is finding these gacha seeds and planting them in soft soil. After a while, they grow into trees with gacha nuts that hold rings inside of them. And you can even buy some special ones in the shop that's only accessible if you're playing on a Game Boy Advance. And much like Link's Awakening, we have a long trading quest that takes place over the course of the whole game. It starts with you helping free this ghost so it can rest, which then gives you a Poe Clock. Give the Poe Clock to this mailman who gives you stationery, you give that to the returning toilet hand who hands you a horrible smell bag, bring that to the chef to clear out his nose and he gives you meat, serve it to the hungry mask salesman who gives you a doggy mask, trade it with the dog breeder for a dumbbell, bring that to this guy who gives you a cheesy mustache, give it to the aspiring comedian and he tells you a funny joke, tell that funny joke to this depressed guy, which brings Link's vow of silence, and while he doesn't laugh, he lets you take a touching book, bump into Maple and she loves the book so much she gives you a magic ore, give the ore to this raft maker for a sea ukulele, bring that to the Zora who gives you a broken sword, and bring that to this guy who fixes it into the noble sword, which does more damage.
The only thing really left to go over is what happens when you link the 2 games together, but since I haven't played Oracle of Seasons, I guess I can't really show that off. Back to the story, I guess.
After speaking with the Maku tree, Link heads into the past and finds that at the suggestion of Nehru, Queen Ambi is constructing a massive tower to supposedly guide her lost lover back home, but we all know that's a lie. We speak with the construction workers to get a shovel and find they've been working non-stop as the sun hasn't set for several days. Go through Maku Road, where Link saves the baby Maku tree and returns to the present, where we learn more about the essences and get the seed satchel. Now we go east to find this graveyard, go inside this tomb to find the skull key, and open the door to our first dungeon, the Spirit's Grave. It's a pretty standard opening dungeon, so thankfully it's not that hard, but the garbage is only yet to come. The mini-boss is this ghost, you just need Slash, we get the power bracelet, and the boss is this guy with a pumpkin head. Let me look up what his name is, hang on. Oh. Pumpkinhead. Well, I guess that is accurate, but yeah, it feels kind of mean. That's like calling an amputee pipe arm, or calling me sponge brain. You slice him until his head pops off, grab it, and then throw it at this little body. A passable first boss. Then you get the first essence, the Eternal Spirit. Like Link's Awakening, you're always given a hint of the next location, so our next stop is the Western Woods. We find it's home to some fairies that want to play hide and seek, and the layout gets all scrambled as you need to find them. After that, we find the next dungeon, but accidentally destroy it, so we go to Nehru's house, where we poke around her private area and find the Harp of Ages. And I'm just glad we didn't find her, question marks. Her spirit then shows up and teaches us the Echo Tune, so we head back into the past and find some mystery seeds, which we take to the Queen in exchange for bombs. Now we can finally enter level 2, the Wing Dungeon, and this place is horrible. It's filled to the brim with holes and other obstacles you can't get rid of that are really hard to avoid, and because you only have a few hearts at this point, it only takes a couple of mistakes before you die. The mini-boss is a bird that slams down on the ground, you get the Rock's Feather, and the boss is the Head Thwomp, yeah, like from Mario. It spins around and you have to throw bombs into it, but you can only hurt him when the red face is showing, and the timing is so picky it makes me want to slam my head through the frickin' floor.
I am not joking when I say I died in this dungeon 12 times. And this isn't even the worst one!
After that garbage, you get the Ancient Wood, that sounds wrong, and the next essence is on Crescent Island. We can cross this river where you find this guy working on a technique for waterproof rope. I know my friend Bill could use that. So we go back to the present, meet Moosh in the graveyard, and he helps us find the Zora Flipper so we can swim, as well as the Shovel Rope. Return to the past and give the rope to this carpenter named Rafton, allowing him to build a raft, fulfilling the prophecy foretold in his name. It's a good thing his parents didn't name him Bumberto, but we won't let us sail without a map, so it's back to the present where we meet Ricky to help him find his gloves, and use him to jump up this cliff where we find our old pal Tinkle, who sells us a chart. Now we can finally set sail, but Link gets caught up in a storm and washes ashore on Crescent Island where all of his items get stolen by these little bastards. This part sucks. It's insanely tedious having to run around the entire island, and you need to swap some of your items with this guy, so this whole thing takes forever. I was seriously doing this crap for like an hour. But on the right side, I can take out my aggression on these cuckoos. Oh god, I have needed this. You're gonna suffer even more than me, you little— oh no, come on, no! Chicken Swarm! Ah!
Death by poison.
Eventually, we find everything and reach the next dungeon, Moonlit Grotto, which is thankfully much better than the last one. You have to break these crystals so the center room comes falling down, and it adds these dials that spin you, but change direction every time you use it, so you gotta approach them from every angle. You get the Seed Shooter, which leads to some really fun puzzles, fight this mole you need to dig out and slash, and the boss is the Shadow Hag, which splits itself apart and disappears when you look at it, so you gotta face the other way and hit it with a bouncing seed. This gives you the Echoing Howl, and we learn the tower is almost complete. Find Dimitri on the beach, feed him some seeds, and he gives us a ride back to shore. Then acquire a flute of your choice, head back to the Fairy Woods, and find your animal buddy, whom you can now summon with the flute. I unknowingly chose Dimitri. Now I can travel up the Noon Highlands to find some lazy carpenters to build a bridge, and reach Symmetry City, which is being decimated by a volcano. Turns out in the past, their tuning nut was broken, and the city was thrown out of balance due to their lack of symmetry. So we take the nut from this guy, learn the currents tune, and go through a really annoying mountain climbing sequence to find this guy named Patch, who requires us to play this weird mini-game in order to fix the nut, where you knock enemies into a hole without letting this cart hit it.
That'd be like if your phone stopped working, so you go into the store, but the only way the employees can fix it is if you balance on a ball and do the Macarena for a solid minute while they shoot lemons at you and you're blindfolded. And if you fall off, you have to start over, and it costs twice as much.
But we do get this thing fixed and put it back where it belongs, so the volcano is no longer causing trouble in the present. The Skull Dungeon is the game going back to sucking. There's lava everywhere, and the combination of having to jump, enemies swarming you, and having to jump while enemies swarm you make it insanely easy to fall in. So I really hope you like dying! This knight throws his sword at you and you have to make it fly back into him. You get the switch hook, and the boss is a flying eye with a bunch of little eyes named Eyesore. Very clever. It's the classic pattern of use the new item you just got and then hit it with a sword. This gives us the Burning Flame. Now we go back to the past and head up Rolling Ridge, which is home to the Gorons. Thanks to the power of time travel, we go up the mountain and fight the Moblin King to get a bomb flower, bring it back to save the village elder, and he gives us the Crown Key. This lets us reach the Crown Dungeon, which is the worst dungeon in the game. It takes so freaking long to navigate, and the enemies come at you from all over the place. There's a bunch of holes and laser statues that are so hard to avoid, you gotta hit these switches to make blocks go up and down, and if you do it wrong, it takes ages to reset, and this whole thing is just miserable. The mini-boss is ripped right from Link's Awakening. It's the one where you throw the ball back at it, only the ball disappears after a couple seconds, and you get the Cane of Somaria. But the worst part of the dungeon is the boss, Smog. This thing is horrible. It splits itself into multiple clouds, and you have to use the cane to push them back together to hurt it. Problem is, the timing is really hard to nail. If you screw it up, you have to reset it with this button that costs hearts, and the pattern is ridiculous and nearly impossible to figure out. No joke, I spent 40 freaking minutes on this oversized fart cloud. Come on, I'm in the last phase. Just please, 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 please. Oh, shit!
Wait, oh, right, that's still broken.
After that hour and a half of my life I'm not getting back, you get the sacred soil and stay in the mountains as you perform this really elaborate trading sequence with the Gorons involving a bunch of mini-games like dancing, shooting seeds in a minecart, hitting targets with your sword, and an annoyingly large amount of running around. Plus, if you perfect some of the mini-games, you can get the boomerang. Eventually, you get not one, but 2 mermaid keys, allowing you to enter the Mermaid's Cave. Much like the Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time, you have to go through this in both the past and present. Both parts have a lot of water, really annoying whiz robes, and these candles that explode if you set them on fire. The mini-boss has no strategy, you just hit him with your sword, and you get the mermaid suit, which lets you swim in deep water, and the controls are kind of weird since you have to tap the D-pad instead of just holding it. The boss is Octogon, a giant octorock you shoot seeds at both above and underwater while he hits you with bubbles and rocks, giving you the bereft peak. We find out Queen Ambry has left the palace, so we have to storm it and have a mini stealth sequence before confronting Varen. We can't harm Nehru's body, so we wait for her to materialize before shooting her with a mystery seed and using the switch hook to yank out Varen before we can slash her. All while she teleports and shoots fire at you. This would be pretty cool if it wasn't for the constant pausing. Link manages to save Nehru, and Ralph and Amby return, allowing Nehru to take us back to the present. But then we find out Varen has possessed Amby and the tower is completed, so we don't have much time left to stop her. Nehru teaches us the Tune of Time, and apparently the next essence is in a fish. Oh no. We swim down to the Zora City and find the ocean has been poisoned, so through some very complicated time travel, we find a magic potion to heal the Zora King, gain the key to the Zora Library, find some fairy powder, which we use to heal the Great Fairy who cures the poisoning, and this lets us enter the next dungeon.
And you have to shift through time in between all of those tasks, by the way. I mean, I know it just got the time tune, but still.
This brings us to Jabu Jabu's Belly, where you have to use these switches to raise and lower the levels of water. Wow, they literally took my and most people's most hated dungeons from Ocarina of Time and combined them for this game. Starting to see why these dungeons suck. Though, honestly, this ended up not being as confusing as I thought it would be, since once you change a water level, you rarely have to put it back. It still takes ages to go through, though. We get the long switch, which extends the switch hook. The mini-boss is a fish that jumps around shooting bubbles, and you can shrink it with the seeds, which is hilarious, and the boss is Plasmarine, a jellyfish that changes colors when you shoot it, and you have to steer the energy it shoots of the opposite color back into it, which is honestly a really cool concept. This gives us the Rolling Sea, but we seem to be too late, as Varen is using the dark power to turn people to stone. We're then given the Zora scale, letting us enter the Sea of Storms, find a pirate ship that gives us the Tokay Eyeball, and place it in this cavern on Crescent Island. After a really annoying cave, we wind up in the Sea of No Return, where we pass through this labyrinth to the final dungeon, the Ancient Tomb. This place is enormous and throws basically everything the game has at you, so yeah, it takes way longer to get through than it should. You get the Power Glove, fight this stupid Reaper by playing energy tennis, which is really hard to angle correctly, and the boss is Ramrock. It has multiple phases, each with a different strategy. First you slash its rock hands back into it, then place a bomb in between its claws, then shoot it with seeds while avoiding lasers and orbs, and then grab its cannonball arms and fling them back at it. This gives us the final essence, the Falling Star. We return to the Maku tree, who gives us a huge Maku seed, and we discover that Varen is actually working for the twin Gerudo sisters known as Twin Rova. We return to the past and discover that Ralph will do whatever it takes to stop Varen, including killing Amby, which would wipe him from existence since she's his ancestor. We then climb the Black Tower, which is filled with enemies, and has this really annoying stair sequence. I have no idea how the last part works, I had to look it up. But at the top, we use both the nut and essences to break this barrier. Here lies Varen, still in Amby's body, who makes short work of Ralph, and this is the same fight as before, but now she summons spiders. After that, she turns into this evil fairy and summons shadow clones of Link that you have to kill while she flies around shooting at you. Honestly, the hard part of this fight isn't the shots, it's slashing without touching her. Nehru and Ralph come rushing in and we leave, but Varen isn't done yet. She grabs Link and drags him back in where she takes her true shape, a circle. We have one last fight where she shifts between 3 different animal forms, a turtle that slams down and creates a small ring of poison, a bee that flies around shooting more bees, and a spider that climbs up and falls. The turtle can only be hit when popping out of the shell, the bee can be hit at any time, but it moves so freaking fast, and the spider has to be hit with a bomb burst. This fight is really annoying, and if you die, you have to do all 3 of these boss battles all over again. Eventually, Link kills Varen, but she claims he's too late, as Twin Rova's plan has already been put into action. The world begins to return to normal, Ralph shares a touching moment with Amby, and Nehru returns us to our proper time period where Link is honored as a hero and begins to train Ralph in the way of the sword. But Twin Rova looks on with content, as Varen's actions have created the Flame of Sorrow, which will apparently grant their wish. What does this mean? Well, we'll find out next time.
Ages is a bit rough. It is impressive for the Game Boy Color, most of the overworld stuff is solid, and it does fix some issues from Link's Awakening, though not all of them, but man, a lot of those dungeons are just not enjoyable. Some of them are fine, but most are either annoyingly long, insanely frustrating, or both. I'm honestly starting to think I'm just not a big fan of 2D Zelda, because I really didn't have that much fun with this game. I was honestly getting some flashbacks to my first playthrough of A Link to the Past, which is not as much of a compliment as you would think. But if you're interested, I guess I can recommend it, though like other early Zelda games, I wouldn't say it's mandatory. I guess all I can do is hope Oracle of Seasons will be better. That's all you can really do sometimes, just look forward to the future and hope it's an improvement. Just like America will be doing with what is sure to be the greatest president in the history of our country.
This just in, it appears the election results were not entirely accurate.